Sierra Miller woke up early, as she did every morning. The warm sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on her bedroom. She stretched and glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m. The sound of birds chirping outside reminded her of the calm mornings she'd grown up with in the city, a city now buzzing with new opportunities and change. Sierra had always been a person of purpose, and today was no different. She slipped into her work clothes, a smart, professional outfit, and ran a hand through her short-cropped hair. She was ready for another day at the office. But today wasn't just any ordinary day. It marked her third week as the new chief of police for her hometown, a city that had recently found itself at the crossroads of progress and unrest. The election of a black woman to such a high position had sparked conversations across the community, some positive, others skeptical. But Sierra was used to skepticism. She'd risen through the ranks, proving herself capable, strategic, and tough. It hadn't been easy, and she'd encountered plenty of obstacles along the way, but she had always believed in herself and her vision for the city. As she sipped her coffee, she reflected on the early challenges she had faced in the department, especially from older officers who didn't believe a woman, let alone a black woman, should hold the top position. They hadn't overtly resisted, but there had been an undercurrent of tension, passive-aggressive remarks, and cold shoulders. Sierra had expected this. She'd prepared for it. But what worried her more was the community's reaction. Despite her credentials, despite her dedication, some people still viewed her appointment as a political move rather than a step toward progress. She sighed as she remembered the faces of her colleagues when she first walked into the precinct. The pride in their eyes had been genuine, but there had been hesitation. It was as though they were unsure how to address her, unsure how to treat her. It hadn't been easy winning their trust, but Sierra wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. She had made it clear that she wasn't here to make friends. She was here to lead. This morning, she had an important meeting with her officers. She needed to reinforce the department's core values: integrity, respect, and service. Sierra was passionate about making the police force reflect the diverse community they served, and she had already begun implementing changes, initiating diversity training, setting up forums for community engagement, and ensuring transparency in the department's operations. But this work was far from over. It was an ongoing battle to change the culture of an institution that had long been steeped in tradition. As she drove toward the precinct, the city was beginning to wake up. People walked briskly along the streets, and the sound of car engines and distant chatter filled the air. Sierra's mind raced with plans for the day. There was a lot to accomplish: meetings with city council members, discussions about police reform, follow-ups with the community outreach program. She had barely begun to settle into her role, but it already felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. The challenges ahead loomed large, but she knew she was ready for them. She pulled into the parking lot of the precinct and stepped out of her car. The air was cool, and the morning fog still clung to the streets. Sierra adjusted her jacket and walked toward the entrance, where a couple of officers were standing by. One of them, Officer Ryan, waved and gave a nod of acknowledgement, while Officer Clark glanced at her briefly before looking away. Sierra had learned quickly that Clark was a man of few words, someone who was content to stay in the background. But she also noticed that he wasn't particularly enthusiastic about the changes she was bringing to the department. She didn't let it bother her, though. She couldn't afford to. Inside, the precinct was quiet, as most officers were out on the streets or attending to administrative duties. Sierra made her way to her office, where her assistant, Janet, handed her a stack of paperwork. "Morning, Chief. The meeting with the mayor has been moved to 1 p.m. And the community forum on police reform is set for next week." "Thanks, Janet. I'll look over the details after this meeting," Sierra replied as she sat down at her desk and began organizing her day. Just as she was about to make her first call, she was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," she said. Officer Ryan stepped in, his usual friendly demeanor somewhat strained. "Hey, Chief, there's a situation downtown. Some traffic stop turned tense. I think you might want to take a look." Sierra nodded and grabbed her jacket. "All right, let's go." She followed Officer Ryan to the parking lot, where her patrol car was waiting. As they drove downtown, Sierra couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be different. The streets, normally bustling with activity, were oddly quiet. It was still early, but there was something in the air that made her uneasy. She glanced at Officer Ryan, who seemed unusually focused on the road. "What's going on downtown? Is it something serious?" "It's hard to say. I got the call that there was an altercation. A routine traffic stop turned heated, and the officers on site are requesting backup," he replied, his voice tense. Sierra's heart rate picked up. This wasn't the kind of thing she had in mind for her first. Crossed, and she stood as though waiting for an explanation. The officers, meanwhile, looked uneasy but also defensive, as though they were trying to justify something to her. Sierra walked up to Officer Ryan, who quickly explained the situation. "The woman claims she's being pulled over for no reason. She says the officers didn't have cause to stop her, and when she asked them why, they got defensive." Sierra's gaze shifted to the woman, who was now eyeing her. The woman's eyes narrowed when she saw the badge on Sierra's chest. But Sierra wasn't sure if it was recognition or something else, maybe irritation, maybe disbelief. She took a deep breath and approached the woman. "Ma'am, I'm Chief Miller. Is everything okay here?" The woman's eyes widened. "You're the chief?" she asked, her tone mixed with surprise and a hint of skepticism. "Yes," Sierra replied, her voice calm. "What seems to be the issue?" The woman hesitated before responding. "I've been stopped for no reason. I asked them why, and they couldn't give me an answer. They started getting defensive. I'm trying to understand why I'm being treated this way." Sierra's stomach tightened. She could see it now, racial profiling. The officers had probably made assumptions based on the woman's appearance without knowing who she was or why she was in the area. She glanced at Officer Clark and Officer Jake, who were now looking at her with visible concern. "All right, I'm going to step in here," Sierra said firmly, turning to the officers. "You two can step aside for a moment." The officers reluctantly moved back, but their discomfort was evident. Sierra turned to the woman. "Ma'am, I apologize for the way you were treated. I'm going to make sure this gets handled properly. Can I get your name?" The woman nodded. "Tiffany Walker." "Thank you, Ms. Walker. Please, let me handle this from here." As Sierra walked back to her car with Officer Ryan, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to explode. But what she didn't know was that this seemingly routine stop was about to spiral into something far bigger than she ever expected. As Sierra walked back to her car with Officer Ryan, the sense of tension in the air grew stronger. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, even as she tried to keep her demeanor calm and composed. The last thing she wanted was for this incident to spiral into something larger, something that could undermine all the work she had put into the department. She could hear the soft hum of her patrol car's engine as she slid into the driver's seat, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as she tried to think through her next steps. Officer Ryan remained quiet for a moment, but she could tell he was just as on edge as she was. "Chief, this doesn't feel right," Ryan said finally, his voice low, almost hesitant. Sierra nodded, her eyes scanning the scene in the rearview mirror. Tiffany Walker was still standing there, her arms crossed, her posture rigid. The two officers, Clark and Jake, seemed to be nervously exchanging glances. It wasn't just that Tiffany had been stopped without clear cause, it was the way the situation had escalated so quickly. Sierra had seen her fair share of tense encounters, but something about this felt different. It felt like the old scars of division and distrust were rising to the surface again, and she couldn't ignore it. We need to make sure we handle this carefully, Sierra said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. It's not just about the stop. It's about how we, as a department, are perceived by the community. We can't afford another mistake. Not now. Ryan looked at her, his brow furrowed. You think this is more than just a traffic stop? You think they were profiling her? I don't know, Sierra replied, her tone measured. But it's looking like it. We need to talk to her, get her side of the story before anything else happens. Ryan nodded, still visibly unsettled. He knew that Sierra was right, things were getting complicated. As she turned the car around to drive back to the scene, she couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. This was her city, her department, and she was responsible for it all. The choices she made today would ripple through the community, and she needed to make sure that the message was clear, that this department was here to protect and serve everyone, no matter who they were or where they came from. When they arrived back at the scene, Sierra could see that the situation hadn't cooled down. Tiffany was still standing there, but now her arms were at her sides. She looked frustrated, but her eyes were sharp, as though she was waiting for something to happen. The two officers were still on edge, their postures stiff and uncertain, as though they didn't know what to do next. Sierra knew they were probably feeling the heat of the situation, feeling the weight of her gaze on them. She had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of the car and approached the group once again. This time, the air felt different, it was thick with tension, the kind that was only born from years of mistrust between law enforcement and the community. Sierra took a breath and tried to center herself. She knew that this wasn't just about one woman and one traffic stop, this was about proving that things could be different. She needed to show that leadership, that her presence, meant something. All right, everyone, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the stillness of the moment. Let's all take a step back, cool down, and talk this out. Tiffany glanced at Sierra, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. The woman's eyes widened slightly when she saw Sierra's uniform. Wait, you're Chief Miller? She asked, her voice almost disbelieving. Sierra nodded. Yes, I am. I understand you're upset, and I want to hear your side of the story. Please, tell me what happened. Tiffany hesitated for a moment, glancing at the officers. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. I was driving through here, just trying to get to a meeting. I haven't done anything wrong, but when I was pulled over, they didn't even tell me why. When I asked, they just started getting defensive. No explanation, just attitude. And then, when I asked for their badge numbers, things just escalated. Sierra nodded slowly, absorbing Tiffany's words. She could hear the frustration in her voice, and she didn't blame her for it. Tiffany wasn't just upset about being stopped, she was upset about the lack of respect, the lack of transparency. It was a sentiment she had heard echoed by many in the community during her short time as chief. People didn't just want fair treatment, they wanted to feel that their officers were accountable, that their voices mattered. Turning to Officer Clark and Officer Jake, Sierra said, I want both of you to explain what happened here. Clearly, things got out of hand. I need to know what led to this. Clark, the older officer, stepped forward first, his jaw clenched. She was acting suspicious. We pulled her over because she was in an area known for high crime rates. When we asked for her ID, she started questioning us, asking why she was being stopped. We tried to explain, but she didn't want to listen. Sierra raised an eyebrow. And when she asked for your badge numbers? What happened then? Clark looked away briefly, then shifted uncomfortably. We got a little defensive. I admit, I wasn't happy about being questioned. But we weren't doing anything wrong. We were just doing our jobs. Sierra could see the tension in his face. She knew that Clark wasn't a bad officer, but his reaction to being questioned spoke volumes about the state of the department. He wasn't just dealing with an Upset civilian, he was dealing with the anxiety that many officers felt when questioned about their actions. And it wasn't just the officers' attitudes that worried her. It was the larger issue of trust between the police force and the community they served. "Officer Clark, Officer Jake," Sierra said carefully, her voice even but firm. "This isn't just about one traffic stop. This is about the relationship between the police and the people we serve. You both need to take a step back and reflect on your actions today. It's not enough to do your job, you need to do it with respect, with transparency. And most importantly, you need to do it with the understanding that you are serving the public, not just enforcing the law." The officers didn't respond immediately. Their faces were a mixture of guilt and defensiveness, unsure of how to react to the correction. Sierra could feel the silence between them, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. This was a teaching moment, not just for the officers, but for the entire department. Turning back to Tiffany, Sierra softened her tone. "Ms. Walker, I want to apologize for the way you were treated today. This isn't the kind of service you should expect from your police department. I assure you, I will personally look into this matter and make sure that the proper steps are taken." Tiffany nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. "I hope so, Chief. But honestly, I've had my fair share of encounters like this. Sometimes it feels like things are never going to change." Sierra met Tiffany's gaze, feeling the weight of her words. She knew exactly what Tiffany meant. She had heard it countless times from members of the community, people who felt like the system was broken, that their voices were being ignored. It was moments like these that made Sierra's job both critical and difficult. It wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about rebuilding the trust that had been lost over the years. "I understand your frustration," Sierra said, her voice steady. "But I promise you, things will change. I'm not here to maintain the status quo. I'm here to make sure that we build a department that serves everyone, equally and with respect." Tiffany seemed to soften at her words. "I hope you're right, Chief. I really do." As Sierra watched Tiffany walk away, she felt a mix of resolve and uncertainty. This was just the beginning. She knew that moments like this would continue to test her leadership, her commitment to change. But she also knew that she couldn't back down. The road ahead was long, and the challenges would be many. But Sierra Miller was ready. She was determined to make sure that no one in her city ever felt like they were invisible, or that their voices didn't matter. The work had only just begun. As the days passed, the incident involving Tiffany Walker weighed heavily on Sierra's mind. The situation had sparked a firestorm of conversation in the community. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the phone calls and emails began flooding into the police precinct, many of them from citizens questioning the department's approach to policing. Sierra spent sleepless nights reviewing the footage from the body cameras, reading reports, and reflecting on the choices she had made. She knew the department's reputation was on the line, and she couldn't afford to let a single misstep tarnish the progress she had worked so hard to achieve. The following morning, Sierra stood in front of a crowded press conference room. The room buzzed with the murmurs of reporters, their eyes trained on her, waiting for her to speak. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the pressure mounting with each passing second. For a moment, she hesitated, but then she reminded herself why she was here, why she had worked tirelessly to reach this point. She wasn't just here to answer questions. She was here to set the tone for the department's future. "Good morning," Sierra began, her voice calm but firm. "I know there are many questions about the incident involving Officer Clark, Officer Jake, and Ms. Tiffany Walker. I'm here to address those concerns directly." She paused, letting the silence in the room settle before continuing. "First and foremost, I want to apologize to Ms. Walker for the way she was treated. No one, regardless of who they are, should ever feel disrespected or mistreated by law enforcement. I take full responsibility for the actions of my officers, and I will ensure that this incident is thoroughly reviewed. We will take immediate steps to address any shortcomings in our training and conduct. A reporter from the back of the room raised their hand, eager to ask the first question. Chief Miller, do you believe this incident was an isolated one, or is there a deeper issue within the department regarding racial profiling? Sierra met the reporter's gaze, her expression unwavering. It's clear that this incident has brought up a larger conversation about trust, accountability, and how we serve our community. I don't believe this is an isolated issue. That's why I'm committed to implementing new training programs focused on cultural sensitivity, bias reduction, and de-escalation techniques. We need to rebuild trust, and that starts with a commitment to change. The questions continued to flow, each one more pointed than the last, but Sierra stood her ground. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to confront the challenges head-on. After the press conference, Sierra met with her senior staff to discuss the next steps. She gathered Officer Clark, Officer Jake, and the rest of the leadership team in the conference room. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unease. Officer Clark, Officer Jake, I want you both to understand the gravity of the situation, Sierra said, her voice measured but resolute. This department represents the people of this community, and our actions reflect who we are as a whole. What happened with Ms. Walker was unacceptable, and it cannot happen again. Clark shifted in his seat, his face flushed with a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. Chief, we didn't mean for things to escalate like that. We were just doing our jobs. She didn't seem cooperative. Sierra shook her head. It's not about her cooperation. It's about how you treated her from the very beginning. You both need to understand that when someone asks for information, when they question your authority, it doesn't automatically mean they're trying to disrespect you. It means they want transparency. You have to respond with respect and professionalism, not defensiveness. Officer Jake spoke up, his voice low. But Chief, we felt threatened. She was asking questions that seemed hostile. Sierra turned to face him directly. I understand how that could have felt, but it's your job to de-escalate, not escalate. And it's my job to make sure you're trained to do just that. This department is going to change, and it's going to start with each one of you. The room was silent for a moment. Sierra could see the officer's unease, but she also saw a glimmer of recognition. They weren't bad officers, they were just part of a system that had allowed certain behaviors to fester without consequence. This was her moment to reshape that system, to instill a new sense of accountability. We're implementing new policies, effective immediately, Sierra continued, her voice steady. You will all undergo additional training, and I will be personally overseeing the creation of a community outreach program to improve relations between the police and the public. We're not just officers, we're part of this community. It's time we start acting like it. The officers nodded, some more reluctantly than others, but Sierra could see that her words had left an impression. As the meeting adjourned, she felt a small sense of hope. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would be many, but she knew this was the right path. She had made a promise to herself, and to the community, that she would make a difference. Now, she had to prove it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, training sessions, and community engagement. Sierra worked tirelessly to ensure that the changes she had promised were being implemented. She reached out to local leaders, activists, and community members to hear their concerns, and she listened carefully. It wasn't easy. Some people were skeptical, others were downright hostile, but Sierra refused to back down. She knew that trust couldn't be built overnight, but she was committed to earning it, one conversation at a time. As part of the new training initiatives, Sierra brought in experts on racial bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural competency. The officers were resistant at first, but Sierra made sure they understood that this wasn't just about policy, it was about their relationships with the people they were sworn to protect. Slowly but surely, the tone in the precinct began to shift. The officers started to understand the importance of empathy, of seeing the community not as us versus them, but as equals. One day, after a particularly challenging training session, Officer Clark approached Sierra. "Chief," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how we need to be more transparent, more empathetic. I've been doing this job for 20 years, but I've never really thought about it that way. I'm willing to learn." Sierra smiled, feeling a sense of pride in him. "That's all I ask, Clark. We all have room to grow. The important thing is that we're willing to change." The change wasn't immediate, and there were still moments of resistance, but Sierra could feel the shift beginning to take root. Then, about a month after the incident with Tiffany, Sierra received an unexpected call. Tiffany Walker had requested a meeting. When Tiffany walked into Sierra's office, there was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. She took a seat, her posture more relaxed than the first time they met. "Chief," Tiffany began, "I wanted to say thank you for listening. And for actually doing something about it. I didn't expect things to change so quickly." Sierra nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation. "Thank you for giving us the opportunity to make things right. It's not easy, but we're committed to doing better." Tiffany smiled. "I can see that. And I want you to know that I'm willing to help. I think we can do more to bring the community and the police together." Sierra was taken aback by her offer, but she saw the sincerity in Tiffany's eyes. "I'd appreciate that, Tiffany. We need all the help we can get." From that day forward, Tiffany became an ally in Sierra's efforts to rebuild trust between the police and the community. Together, they organized town halls, workshops, and outreach programs, creating an open dialogue between officers and residents. Slowly, the walls of mistrust began to come down. The incident with Tiffany Walker had been a turning point, not just for Sierra, but for the entire department. It had forced them to confront their biases, their shortcomings, and the deep-rooted issues that had plagued their relationship with the community for far too long. But through those painful conversations, through the discomfort and the difficult decisions, they began to make real progress. Sierra knew there was still much work to be done, but as she looked around at the changes unfolding in her department and in her city, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like things were starting to change, for the better. The weeks following the pivotal incident between Tiffany Walker and the officers marked a decisive turning point in Sierra's leadership of the police department. The changes she had implemented, though initially met with resistance, were slowly beginning to show positive effects. However, she knew the real challenge had only just begun. Restoring trust wasn't an overnight process, and the road ahead would require consistent dedication, not just in terms of policy, but in shaping the very mindset of the officers under her command. Sierra spent countless hours walking the precinct, speaking with officers one-on-one, and pushing for meaningful change within her department. There were moments when it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. There were still officers who resisted the cultural training, who bristled at the idea of engaging with the community in ways they weren't accustomed to. The reality of change, she realized, was never as simple as a well-intentioned policy. It was a constant struggle to overcome old habits, prejudices, and the inherent authority that came with the badge. But Sierra was undeterred. She had made a commitment to herself, to Tiffany, and to the community. She was going to see this through, no matter how difficult it became. One morning, as Sierra prepared for another community meeting, she received a call from an anonymous source. The voice on the other end was hesitant, trembling with a mixture of fear and urgency. "Chief, you don't know me, but you need to listen. There are people in your department who aren't following the new protocols. They're still profiling people. They're still acting like nothing has changed." Sierra's heart sank as she listened to the caller. She had known this day would come, but hearing it, feeling the weight of it, was different. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "I can't say. But I'm telling you, you need to dig deeper. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen officers look the other way, deliberately misreport things. They don't care about your policies. They only care about themselves. The call ended abruptly, leaving Sierra with more questions than answers. Her instinct was to follow up immediately, but she had learned the hard way that rash decisions didn't help anything. She needed to be careful, strategic. This was the moment she feared, the moment when the shadows in the department would try to pull her back into the darkness. That afternoon, Sierra sat down with her senior staff, her mind racing. She couldn't ignore the call, but she couldn't act on it blindly either. "We've come too far for this," she said, voice steady but edged with concern. "We've made a lot of progress, but this department's culture hasn't changed overnight. We need to stay vigilant, hold each other accountable." "We'll keep an eye out, Chief," Officer Clark said, his tone sounding earnest but weary. "It's not going to be easy, but we'll do our part." Sierra nodded, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still brewing beneath the surface. She had come to trust her instincts, and they were telling her that the problem was deeper than a few bad apples. There was a culture of resistance, a stubborn undercurrent of traditional policing that she had underestimated. The following week, Sierra ordered a comprehensive internal audit, something she had been reluctant to do for fear of undermining her own team. But the anonymous tip couldn't be ignored. She needed to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. She tasked a trusted lieutenant, Carlos Rivera, with leading the audit. Carlos had always been a reliable officer, known for his integrity and meticulous attention to detail. If anyone could get to the bottom of things, it was him. As the audit progressed, more disturbing information came to light. There were multiple accounts of officers engaging in questionable practices, ranging from racial profiling to reports being falsified to cover up certain actions. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery of a small group within the department that had been actively sabotaging the reforms Sierra had put in place. These officers were spreading rumors, undermining the training, and subtly inciting resistance among their colleagues. They weren't just ignoring the changes, they were actively fighting against them. Sierra felt a deep, cold anger rise within her. She had expected pushback, but this was something else entirely. These officers weren't just failing to adapt, they were poisoning the well, spreading toxicity that could ruin everything she had worked for. She had to make a choice: confront these officers head-on, or risk letting them derail the future of the department. After much consideration, Sierra decided there was no other option. She couldn't allow this rot to fester. The following week, she called a department-wide meeting. She stood at the front of the room, her back straight and her gaze steady as she looked out over her officers. There was a palpable tension in the air, but Sierra didn't flinch. This was her moment to show the entire department who was in charge, and more importantly, what kind of leader she was going to be. "I've always believed in transparency," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "That's why I'm going to be blunt with you all. We've uncovered some disturbing behaviors within this department, officers who have chosen to ignore the changes we've worked so hard to implement. They've chosen to undermine the work we're doing, and that ends now." The room was dead silent. Every officer was looking at her, some with uncertainty, others with defiance. But Sierra stood firm, her gaze unflinching. "These officers are being held accountable," she continued. "They will face consequences for their actions, and I will not tolerate anything that puts our community, or our department, at risk. There will be no room for excuses. This is a turning point, and it's up to each of you to decide what side you're on." The tension in the room was palpable as Sierra's words settled over the officers. Some faces softened, while others hardened in defiance. But she knew what she had to do. The small group of resistant officers was given an ultimatum: either they would fully commit to the changes, or they would leave. The consequences were clear: no more chances for those who weren't willing to evolve. In the following days, Sierra faced a wave of criticism, both inside and outside the department. There were whispers of rebellion, rumors that Sierra was too harsh, too uncompromising. But she remained steadfast. She knew this was the only way forward. As the weeks went by, some of the resistant officers chose to leave, while others begrudgingly accepted the new policies. It was a difficult transition, but Sierra was resolute. Then, just when she thought things might settle, another unexpected twist occurred. Tiffany Walker, who had become a trusted ally in the push for reform, approached Sierra with a request. "Chief, I've been hearing a lot of feedback from the community. People are still angry. They still don't trust the department. They feel like nothing has changed, even with all the training and the new policies." Sierra's heart sank. She had been so focused on internal reform that she hadn't fully realized the depth of the community's skepticism. Tiffany continued, her tone sincere but urgent. "You need to be out there, talking to the people. You need to show them that you're committed, not just in words, but in action. You need to listen to their stories, their pain, their frustrations. Only then will they believe you." Sierra knew Tiffany was right. She had been so focused on reforming the department from the inside that she had neglected to address the broader issue, how the community viewed the police. It wasn't enough to make changes behind closed doors, she needed to be visible, to engage directly with the people she served. Taking Tiffany's advice to heart, Sierra began organizing town hall meetings, public forums, and listening sessions. She made herself available to anyone who wanted to speak to her, regardless of their stance. It was exhausting, emotionally draining work, but Sierra knew it was necessary. She had to prove that she was willing to do more than just manage the department. She had to show the community that she was one of them. As the months went by, Sierra began to see a slow but steady shift in the community's perception of the department. People were starting to engage with the officers more positively, and while there was still a long road ahead, Sierra could feel the trust rebuilding, bit by bit. But just when things seemed to be turning around, a shocking event rocked the department. A viral video surfaced of an officer in another precinct using excessive force during an arrest. The incident, though not directly related to Sierra's department, threatened to undo everything she had worked for. The video sparked outrage across the country, and Sierra found herself once again thrust into the spotlight, forced to defend the very system she had been working to reform. The pressure mounted, and for a moment, Sierra questioned whether the work she was doing was enough. Was it possible to change a broken system? Could she really make a lasting difference? But then, standing in front of a crowd of concerned citizens, Sierra remembered the words that Tiffany had spoken to her all those months ago. She couldn't back down now. Not after everything they had accomplished. Not after everything Tiffany had fought for. The department had come too far, and so had she. Sierra's resolve strengthened. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She knew she had made the right choice by facing the difficult truths, by holding herself and her department accountable. And with the support of the community, and allies like Tiffany, she would continue the fight for real change. In the end, the true transformation of the department wasn't about one officer or one incident, it was about the relentless commitment to justice, the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and the unwavering belief that change was possible. Sierra had proven that, even in the face of adversity, the power to reshape the future lay in the hands of those willing to fight for what was right. And she would never stop fighting for that future. The days that followed the tense town hall meeting were a blur for Sierra. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally, but the urgency of the moment kept her focused. As the new chief of police, she knew that even the smallest misstep could undo everything she had worked for. The department was in the midst of a cultural revolution, one that would reshape not only the police force but the entire community's relationship with law enforcement. Yet, in the back of her mind, Sierra couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead of her. The national unrest following the viral video of the officer's excessive force had only amplified the pressure on Sierra's shoulders. Every media outlet, every local politician, and every community leader had something to say about it. The world was watching, waiting for Sierra to respond, to make a statement, to take action. But the truth was, she didn't know what the right answer was. She had worked tirelessly to shift the culture within her department, to build trust, but the video, the tragedy, exposed just how deep the distrust ran in every corner of society. For the first time in a long while, Sierra felt like an outsider, a leader adrift in the very system she was trying to reform. One evening, as she sat in her office, reviewing reports of community interactions, she received a message from Tiffany Walker. Tiffany had become a crucial ally in Sierra's reform efforts, but as much as they had accomplished together, Sierra knew that Tiffany's own work was far from finished. Tiffany had started a community outreach program aimed at healing the deep divide between the police and the citizens they were meant to protect. But the video incident had shaken the foundation of everything they had built. "Chief, we need to talk," the message read. "There's a lot of fear in the streets. People feel like they're not being heard. They need to see us taking action." The words hit Sierra harder than she expected. Tiffany was right. Words alone weren't enough. The community needed to see real change, real accountability. She thought back to her decision to confront the officers within her department who were resisting the new policies. That had been the right choice, but now, this video, this public scandal, felt like a punch in the gut. It was as if all the work they had done was being erased in an instant. Sierra closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew she couldn't hide behind the badge. Tiffany was right. She needed to take action. She needed to show the community that she was not just a figurehead, but a leader who was willing to take the tough steps, even when it seemed like the world was crumbling around her. She called Tiffany. "We need to meet. There's something we have to do," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Within hours, they were sitting together in a small coffee shop near the precinct, a place that had become their unofficial war room. Tiffany's face was drawn, but her eyes were clear and focused. "The community's restless, Sierra," she said, her voice tight with concern. "They're angry, and they're not going to wait around for you to figure this out. They want to see accountability. They want to see real change, not just words. They want to know that this department isn't like the one in that video. And I get it. I do. But the only way we're going to win their trust is by being transparent and taking bold action." Sierra listened carefully, feeling the weight of Tiffany's words. This was bigger than just reforming the department. This was about dismantling the broken systems that had allowed abuse of power to fester. It was about earning the trust of the community, one painful step at a time. And Sierra knew that, as chief, it was her responsibility to take the first steps. "I've been thinking the same thing," Sierra replied. "We can't keep doing things the way we have. We need to show the community that we're on their side. But it's not just about words, it's about the actions we take next. We need to hold ourselves accountable and lead by example." Tiffany nodded, her expression softening. "Exactly. You've done a lot to change things internally, Sierra. But now it's time to take it to the streets. You need to be visible. You need to show the people that you're not just talking about change, you're living it." Sierra felt a renewed sense of determination surge within her. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment where the rhetoric would meet reality. She had spent months reforming her department, trying to undo years of institutionalized racism and corruption. But she hadn't fully realized how much she needed to engage with the public, how much they needed to see her as more than just a leader in a uniform. She stood up, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to host a series of community events, public forums, listening sessions, and even ride-alongs where we're out there on the streets with the community, showing them that we're willing to engage, to hear their concerns, to be there in ways that we've never been before. And I want the department to be right there with me, making it clear that we're all in this together." Tiffany smiled, her eyes glistening with pride. That's what I'm talking about. Let's do this. It's going to be a long road, but we can't stop now. The community needs us. Over the next several weeks, Sierra and Tiffany worked tirelessly to organize a series of community events. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people came to the forums, expressing their frustrations, their fears, and their hopes for a better future. Sierra listened carefully to each individual story, offering her own insights when necessary, but always letting the community take center stage. She learned more about the pain that had been festering in the streets, and it fueled her resolve to continue the fight for justice. As the weeks turned into months, Sierra saw real, tangible progress. Officers who had been resistant to the changes were beginning to open up. They were starting to understand the importance of their role in the community, of being protectors, not oppressors. Sierra had become a beacon of hope for many, not just because of the reforms she had implemented, but because she had shown the world that she was willing to walk the difficult path of accountability, even when it meant facing the most uncomfortable truths. But just as the department was beginning to heal, a shocking revelation threatened to undo everything. One of Sierra's most trusted officers, Lieutenant Jenkins, was caught in a corruption scandal involving stolen evidence. The news hit the precinct like a bombshell. Jenkins had been one of Sierra's staunchest supporters, a man she had trusted completely. The betrayal stung deep. Sierra felt her heart drop as she stood in front of her department, facing a room full of officers who were anxiously awaiting her response. "I know this is a difficult time for all of us," she began, her voice steady but laced with the weight of the situation. "But I want to be clear. There is no place in this department for corruption. There is no place for dishonesty, and there is no place for anyone who betrays the trust of the community. Lieutenant Jenkins will be held accountable for his actions, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that justice is served." The fallout from Jenkins' scandal reverberated through the department. There were whispers of disillusionment, of doubts about Sierra's ability to lead. But Sierra, ever the steadfast leader, refused to back down. She knew that this was yet another test, one that would either define her leadership or destroy it. She couldn't let that happen. In the aftermath of Jenkins' arrest, Sierra faced a difficult decision. She had always prided herself on holding her officers accountable, but now, the pressure was mounting. Could she trust anyone within her department? And if she couldn't, how could she continue to lead with integrity? The answer came to her in the form of a simple truth: leadership was never about having all the answers. It was about having the courage to face the challenges head-on, to remain steadfast in the pursuit of justice, and to inspire others to do the same. Sierra knew that, despite the setbacks, the work was far from over. She would continue to fight for a department that served the community, not just in words but in actions. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but Sierra was more committed than ever to seeing it through. She would not allow one bad officer, one scandal, to define the legacy of her leadership. As the department moved forward, Sierra knew that it was the small, everyday actions that would truly reshape the future, a future built on accountability, trust, and the relentless pursuit of justice. And so, with unwavering determination, Sierra Walker faced the challenges ahead. She knew the road would be long, but with each step, she was getting closer to the kind of change that would reverberate through her department, her community, and beyond. The transformation wasn't just about one person or one department, it was about building a better world for everyone, one decision at a time. And no matter the obstacles, Sierra would continue to fight for that vision, with all her heart.